My mother robbed my future. She didn't just take the money I'd painstakingly saved for college, she stole a piece of me. And when she dared to ask for more, I knew I couldn't let her walk all over me again. At 24, I'm still reeling from the sting. I've kept this bottled up for years, a secret I haven't even shared with my closest friends. But lately, the memories keep resurfacing, demanding to be acknowledged. I need to finally face it all, put it out there. It began when I turned 18, high school graduation a fresh memory, ready to step into adulthood, or so I believed. It had always been Mom and me, a team of two, ever since I can remember. Dad was a ghost, a blank space in our family portrait. Mom worked tirelessly, juggling multiple jobs to keep us afloat. We weren't rich, but we were surviving. I admired her work ethic, her determination, even if we didn't always see eye to eye. She was often strict, sometimes emotionally distant, but I chalked it up to exhaustion from her relentless work schedule. When I was 16, everything shifted. That's when Rick entered the scene. Initially, he seemed harmless enough, polite, superficially friendly, and maybe a little too slick for my taste. He came with 2 kids, Julia, who was 14, and Max, who was 12. Within 6 months of their dating, they were moving in, and a year later, Mom and Rick were married. It felt like overnight I became invisible. Mom bent over backwards for Rick and his children, showering them with new clothes, expensive outings to amusement parks, and even allowing Julia to completely redesign her room with brand new furniture. Meanwhile, I was still wearing clothes that were too small and using a battered desk from a garage sale that we bought when I was 12. It wasn't just about the money or the attention, it was the blatant way she prioritized Rick and his kids over me in everything. For instance, Julia's 16th birthday party was a lavish affair. I'm talking about a fully catered event, a DJ, an elaborate cake, the whole princess for a day treatment that I couldn't believe we could afford. Rick invited what felt like half the town, and Julia ended the night with the keys to a brand new car. In stark contrast, for my 16th birthday, Mom baked a cake from a box, and we had a quiet dinner at home. No party, no car, not even a particularly thoughtful gift. She gave me a set of towels because, and I quote, "You'll need them when you move out one day." It wasn't like we suddenly had endless piles of cash, but somehow Rick's kids were always treated like royalty. Then there was Max. When he developed an interest in basketball, Mom enrolled him in every possible camp, bought him ridiculously expensive sneakers, and even drove him 2 hours each way to some fancy weekend league games. I, on the other hand, had been begging her for years to let me take piano lessons. She always dismissed it, claiming we simply couldn't afford it. It felt like more than just simple favoritism, it felt like I was a second-class citizen in my own home. Every decision Mom made revolved around Rick and his kids, and if I dared to need something, it was always met with a dismissive, maybe next time, or we'll figure it out later. The deepest cut came when Rick and Mom sat me down and announced that they were turning my bedroom into a dedicated study space for Julia because she supposedly needed a quiet environment to focus on her studies. I was relegated to the cramped, dusty guest room at the back of the house, which barely fit my bed and a dresser. And the irony? Julia rarely even used the study space. I'd often find her in there taking selfies and making silly TikTok videos. But the ultimate betrayal occurred after I graduated from high school. I had been juggling 2 part-time jobs for over a year, sacrificing my social life and free time to save every single penny for college. By graduation, I had managed to scrape together $6,500. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to cover my first year at the local community college and leave me with a small cushion for textbooks and supplies. I felt a surge of pride in my accomplishment. Then, a few weeks before classes were scheduled to start, I logged into my bank account to check my balance. What I saw sent a wave of icy dread through me. My account was completely empty. Every single dollar I had worked so hard to earn had vanished. Initially, I refused to believe it. It had to be a mistake, a glitch in the system, or perhaps my account had been hacked. I frantically called the bank, my voice trembling as I tried to unravel what had happened. The news hit me like a punch to the gut. The money was gone, withdrawn by someone with access to the account. An icy dread filled me. Mom was the only other person authorized to touch that account. I confronted her the same day. I remember my hands shaking as I walked into the living room, the question barely audible as I asked if she'd taken my money. Her reaction, it was like she'd been expecting it. A simple nod, followed by, "Yes, I used it," delivered with an infuriating casualness. My voice trembled as I asked why, and she said Rick needed help buying things for the kids. "They're starting school, you know." I was reeling. Every single dollar I had painstakingly saved for college, gone, used to buy clothes and school supplies for Julia and Max. Fury coursed through me. I told her that money represented my future, a future she just casually pilfered. She simply shrugged, offering, "You're part of this family. We all have to contribute." That's when the awful truth crystallized. She didn't see me as her daughter anymore, just as a convenient resource to be tapped whenever needed. So, after she drained my college fund, I packed a bag and called my cousin Sarah. Leaving felt like the hardest and best decision I'd ever made, a desperate leap with no safety net. But I knew I couldn't stay in that house any longer. Sarah has always been my anchor, my safe haven. She's 10 years older than me and lives about 30 minutes away in a small but welcoming apartment. She didn't hesitate for a second when I called, tears choking my voice as I explained what had happened. "Come here," she said. "Stay as long as you need. We'll figure things out." Arriving at Sarah's, I was a complete mess, a shattered version of myself. One suitcase held most of my clothes and a chaotic jumble of things I'd grabbed at the last minute. That was it. Everything else, every vestige of my old life, I left behind. I didn't even feel like it belonged to me anymore. What was the point? Sarah, bless her heart, didn't pry or bombard me with questions. Instead, she just wrapped me in a hug, handed me a soft blanket, and gently said, "Let's order a pizza." The initial days were a blur of raw emotion. I felt adrift, like I had lost all sense of myself. I had spent my entire life believing I had a supportive mother, even if she wasn't perfect. But after what she did, the trust was irrevocably broken. And realistically, it wasn't just about the money itself, it was about what the money symbolized. It was my dedication, my dreams, my aspirations towards independence, and she just took it all without a second thought. Sarah was my lifeline during that period. She practically dragged me out of bed on days when I wanted to do nothing but hide under the covers, firmly telling me, "You're not going to let them win by giving up on yourself." She sat with me and helped me map out a plan, finding a new job, exploring new avenues for my education. For a while, I worked at a local coffee shop near Sarah's apartment. It wasn't glamorous, but it was enough to begin rebuilding my savings. More importantly, it gave me a sense of purpose beyond wallowing in self-pity. I gradually began to recognize the extent to which I had been clinging to resentment and anger. And while I wasn't willing to forgive my mom, and honestly, I probably never will be, I refused to let it consume me. Setting achievable goals proved incredibly helpful. Initially, it was simply saving $500 so I could open a new bank account that my mom couldn't access. Then it was saving enough to cover the cost of a single class at the community college. Eventually, I was able to register as a part-time student and take those first hesitant steps back into education. It wasn't the grand, traditional college experience I had once envisioned, but it was a beginning. Living with Sarah was transformative, a stark contrast to the atmosphere I had grown accustomed to at home. Most significantly, she treated me like an adult with respect and understanding. She never judged me when money was tight and I couldn't contribute to the groceries or rent. It was always, "What do you want to do?" instead of just dictating the plans. Every Friday, we'd settle onto the couch, order takeout, and watch some brain-numbing reality TV. It was simple, but it gave me a sense of belonging, something akin to home. Meanwhile, my own mother was a ghost. When she did contact me, it was never to see how I was holding up. It was always, "Are you thinking about coming home?" or "We need to discuss your financial contributions." It was like she couldn't grasp that she was the reason I'd left in the first place. Most of her messages went unanswered. What could I possibly say? "Thanks for making my life a living hell?" Uncle Dave, who's always been a good guy, filled me in on the homefront gossip. Apparently, Rick was still glued to the couch, ruling his domain while Mom was working herself to the bone to keep everything afloat. He mentioned Julia joining some ridiculously expensive cheerleading squad and Max getting private guitar lessons. "Oh, and your mom got Julia a new iPhone for her birthday," he casually added during one call. My eyes practically rolled out of my head. "Of course, she did," I muttered. But honestly, the sting was gone. They had their version of a perfect family and I was busy trying to create my own. By the time I hit 20, things were finally starting to look up. I'd saved enough to transfer to a university about an hour away and found a shared apartment with a couple of other students. I could finally breathe, finally focus on my future. The most surprising thing about leaving that house was the immediate improvement in my mental health. I hadn't even realized the weight I was carrying until I wasn't living under the same roof as Rick and his entitled children. Graduation arrived and I somehow managed to land a decent job in marketing. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a handle on my life. I was paying my own bills, living in a small, cozy studio apartment, and starting to see a future where I wasn't constantly worried about earning my mother's approval. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, Mom decided to reappear. It started with a simple text, "Hey, we need to talk. Call me when you have a second." The thought filled me with dread. After our last meaningful interaction consisted of her emptying my bank account and leaving me to fend for myself, why would I willingly open that door again? Eventually, she called, and against my better judgment, I answered. Huge mistake. The moment I said hello, she launched into her sales pitch. Julia is starting college, she announced, as if that were supposed to evoke some kind of emotion in me. She's decided dorm life isn't for her. It's too loud and she needs her own space to concentrate on her studies. I could see exactly where this was heading, but I let her continue her charade. So, we've been looking at apartments for her near campus, she went on. We found a really nice one-bedroom. It's only $1,500 a month. Really affordable for the area. Then came the bombshell. I was hoping you could help with the rent. You're doing well now, right? I almost burst out laughing. You're asking me to pay $1,500 a month for Julia's apartment? Are you actually serious? She sighed as if I were the unreasonable one. Not the whole thing, just a portion. Maybe $1,000 a month. I couldn't process what I was hearing. Mom, Julia isn't my responsibility. She isn't even my sister. She's your stepdaughter. She's family, Mom snapped back, her voice laced with accusation. You don't just abandon family. I wanted to scream. This was coming from the same woman who essentially abandoned me the second Rick and his kids entered the picture, and now she was giving me a lecture on family values. Why can't Rick help with this? I countered, or Julia for that matter. Is she getting a free ride again? The suggestion that Julia get a part-time job like every other college student immediately set Mom on edge. Rick's doing the best he can, she insisted, her voice rising slightly, and Julia needs to concentrate on her studies. A job would be a distraction. Really? I retorted, the sarcasm practically rolling off my tongue. Because history is overflowing with college students who haven't managed to balance classes and work. She conveniently ignored my dig. It's not like we're asking you to pay forever, she added, a line I'd heard before, a line laced with false promises. That's what she said when she raided my college fund, promising it was just a temporary measure to get through a tough period. That tough period morphed into years of feeling invisible while Rick and his kids got everything they wanted. No, I stated firmly, my voice leaving no room for argument. I'm not doing it. Mom's reaction was predictable. The accusations of ingratitude started flowing, a recital of all the supposed sacrifices she'd made for me growing up. I felt a familiar heat rising, but I fought to stay calm. Mom, you weren't doing me a favor. You were being a parent. It's a fundamental responsibility, not some act of extraordinary generosity. Of course, that just fueled her fire. She launched into a detailed inventory of all the time she'd invested buying clothes, driving me to school, feeding me, basic parental duties. She presented them as though she deserved a Medal of Honor. I'm not arguing about this, Mom, I finally declared, cutting through the noise. I am not paying for Julia's apartment. That's final. And I hung up, craving the sudden silence. You'd think that would be the end of it, right? Absolutely not. This is my mother we're talking about, master manipulator and guilt trip extraordinaire. She wasn't about to take no for an answer. First came the pity party. My phone started buzzing nonstop with texts detailing the hardship she was facing. You have no idea the pressure I'm under, she texted. Next came the enlistment of backup. First up was Uncle Dave. He called me one evening, attempting a casual tone that didn't quite land. Hey, he started, your mom's been a little upset lately. She mentioned you're not helping with Julia's apartment. I sighed, feeling the familiar wave of annoyance. Yeah, Dave, because it's not my responsibility. Well, she's really struggling, he replied, predictably taking her side. Maybe you could just help out until they get back on their feet. I almost laughed out loud. Dave, they've been getting on their feet for the past 7 years. At what point are they actually supposed to be on their feet? He was silent for a moment, clearly stumped. Instead, he trotted out the old family sticks together argument. I understand you're upset about what happened before, he said cautiously, but she's still your mother. Don't you think you're being a little harsh? Harsh? I repeated, my disbelief clear in my tone. Dave, she drained my college fund and treated me like an afterthought for years. Now she wants me to clean up her mess. No, I'm not doing it. To his credit, Dave didn't push it too much further. He mumbled something about not wanting to get involved and quickly ended the call. But still, it was incredibly frustrating to see how easily she manipulated him into joining her campaign. Then came the real surprise, Julia herself. I hadn't spoken to her in years, so when her name popped up on my phone, I was taken aback. Her text was short and dripping with entitlement. Hey, I heard you're not helping with my apartment. Not sure why you're being so difficult about this, but it's not that much money for you. It's literally just rent. Just rent, as if the $1,500 plus a month was insignificant to me. I stayed silent. Responding felt pointless. Julia had always been treated like royalty, and clearly nothing had changed. After that came Mom's guilt trip, amped up to an unbearable level. A lengthy, emotionally charged text landed on my phone, claiming I was shattering the family and jeopardizing Julia's future. She even added some bizarre accusation about how refusing to help proved I'd never cared about them. I wanted to scream into the void. How is any of this my fault? She chose to prioritize Rick and his children over me, but now that her precious Julia needed something, I was suddenly the villain. What ate at me the most was how deeply it affected me. Even knowing I was right, guilt started to worm its way in. Was I being too severe? Would helping just this once truly be that monumental? I confided in Sarah and she immediately shot it down. Don't you dare give in, she insisted. They've already taken so much. This isn't about Julia's future, it's about control. Your mom resents your independence and is trying to reel you back in. She was right, but I still struggled to shake the feeling. That's the insidious thing about family, they know precisely how to exploit your vulnerabilities. Mom had spent years training me to feel responsible for her issues, and even now, I found myself falling into that old pattern. The last straw arrived about a week later. A voicemail from Mom, pure emotional blackmail. It was classic manipulation, playing the victim, distorting the truth, and trying to cast me as the bad guy. For a moment, it almost worked. I sat there, listening to the message, feeling this horrible knot of anger and sadness tighten in my chest. I called Sarah and recounted the voicemail. What should I do? I pleaded. Block her, Sarah said immediately. If she refuses to respect your boundaries, you need to protect yourself. And that's precisely what I did. I blocked her number, her emails, and even her social media. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like I was in control. Of course, I knew this wasn't the end. My mom wasn't one to surrender easily, and I sensed she had more schemes brewing. But for now, I was done. Thanks for reading, Reddit. I'll update you on the fallout, but believe me, it only gets messier from here. Hey Reddit, I'm back with an update. As you know, Mom refused to take no for an answer regarding Julia's apartment situation, but what I hadn't anticipated was Rick's involvement. Honestly, I hadn't given him much thought since moving out years ago. He was more of a background irritation, the type who always made grand pronouncements but never followed through. So, when he decided to wade into this mess, I should have recognized the coming storm. It began with a random phone call. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered it anyway because, let's be honest, my judgment was clouded that day. The moment I said hello, I heard his voice. Hey there, Rick said, like we were old friends catching up. My stomach clenched. I hadn't spoken to him since leaving home. What do you want? I asked, cutting through any pretense of politeness. He wasted no time getting to the point. Mom tells me you're refusing to contribute to Julia's apartment, he stated, his voice even, but with a subtle sharpness, as if he were trying to force me into compliance. That's right, I responded, determined to keep my tone controlled. He let out a strained, humorless chuckle, the kind that implied I'd face consequences. I don't think you fully grasp the gravity of the situation, he continued. Oh, I understand it perfectly, I retorted, the word feeling like a bitter taste in my mouth. You expect me to finance an entire apartment for Julia simply because she's too good for a dorm? That's not going to happen. He immediately dropped the pretense of civility. Let me be perfectly clear, he stated, his voice hardening. Your mom is already under a tremendous amount of strain. If you don't step up and fulfill your role, you're going to push her past her breaking point. Is that what you truly want? I couldn't believe the audacity. My role? Are you serious? I didn't promise Julia a lifestyle that we can't afford. That's on you and Mom. Rick dismissed my words with a wave of his hand. This isn't about promises, he declared. It's about family. And you're part of this family whether you acknowledge it or not. I almost laughed out loud at his pronouncement. Rick, you and I both know you've never genuinely considered me family. I was merely the extra baggage that came along with Mom, so don't you dare lecture me about the sanctity of family. My words must have struck a chord because his tone grew icier. You've always been ungrateful, he accused. We took you in when your mom was barely making ends meet, and this is how you repay our generosity? That was the last straw. I snapped. Took me in? Are you actually kidding me right now? That was my house before you ever even appeared on the scene. You strolled in with your kids and acted as if you owned the place. I didn't need you, Rick. What I needed was a mom who truly cared about me, who prioritized my well-being. A long, charged silence hung in the air, and for a fleeting moment, I entertained the hope that I'd silenced him. But, unsurprisingly, he wasn't finished. Look, he said finally, his voice now soft, but with a calculated edge. You can play the victim all you want, but here's the undeniable reality. If Julia doesn't secure that apartment, everything will start to crumble around here. Your mom is unable to cope with the added stress, and I'm not going to stand idly by and watch her fall apart because of your actions." I froze at the way he delivered the words so matter-of-factly, as if it were solely my responsibility to hold their entire lives together, as if I possessed the magical ability to resolve everything with a simple transfer of funds. The very notion was so preposterous that I almost burst out laughing. "Let me ask you something, Rick," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Why don't you cover the cost of the apartment? Or, even better, why doesn't Julia actually get a job? I worked tirelessly to save for college, and you both essentially stole that from me. Why should I sacrifice even more for her benefit?" Rick evaded my questions altogether. Instead, he doubled down on his previous argument. "This isn't about money," he insisted, which struck me as utterly absurd considering that money seemed to be the only thing he ever seemed to care about. "It's about priorities. Julia's education is at stake here. Do you honestly want to be the one who sabotages her future?" I reached my breaking point. "You know what, Rick? You're right about one thing. This isn't about money. It's about the fact that you've spent years leeching off my mom and pretending to be the patriarch of the family. Well, here's a newsflash for you, you're not. You're a complete failure, unable to even support your own children." His audacity silenced him momentarily, but I knew it wouldn't last. "How dare you speak to me that way?" he finally sputtered, his tone laced with a pathetic attempt at authority. "And how dare you expect me to foot the bill for something that has absolutely nothing to do with me?" I retorted, feeling a surge of anger. "Consider us even then." Rick, realizing his tactics were failing, ended the call with a final, desperate attempt to make me feel guilty. "I hope you can live with yourself," he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity, "because when everything falls apart, it's going to be your fault." And then he hung up. I sat there, absorbing his words. I wasn't upset or shaken, just intensely angry. Who did he think he was, calling me and trying to intimidate me into paying for his daughter's apartment? That was Rick in a nutshell. He didn't take no for an answer. He schemed, manipulated, and bullied until he got what he wanted. And if he couldn't get it from me, I knew he'd try to manipulate Mom. But whatever his next move was, I refused to be dragged into their dysfunctional world. I had spent years cleaning up after their mistakes, and I was done. Thanks for reading, Reddit. I'll update you on what happens next, but trust me, this is far from over. Update 2. Hey Reddit, I'm back again. After Rick's attempt to guilt and intimidate me into paying for Julia's apartment, I really thought I had seen the worst of it, but I was wrong. What transpired next revealed the true depth of his manipulative and selfish nature. A couple of weeks after that frustrating phone call, I received a message from my Uncle Dave. Dave is usually one to avoid drama. He's a peacekeeper type of guy. So, when he texted me saying, "Hey, can we talk? It's about your mom," I knew something was wrong. When I called him, the first thing he said was, "Your mom is not doing well." I rolled my eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. "Let me guess," I said, trying to control my frustration. "It's about Julia's apartment." "It's more complex than that," Dave replied, and that made me feel nervous. Apparently, Rick had delivered an ultimatum to my mother. She either found a way to pay for Julia's apartment or he was leaving. He had threatened to end their relationship if she didn't come up with the money. Honestly, hearing this, I wasn't even shocked. Rick was a master at exploiting people, and my mom was no exception. He had been leeching off her for years, barely lifting a finger while she worked tirelessly to keep their household afloat. And now he was threatening to abandon her unless she caved to his demands. Does she honestly believe he'll stick around after all this? I asked, my voice laced with disbelief. "I don't know," he said, sounding worried. "But she's convinced she can't lose him, and she's desperately trying to figure out how to make it work." I was furious, not only at Rick for being the manipulative parasite he always was, but at my mom for allowing things to go this far. She had been bending over backward for this guy and his kids for years, and now he was pulling this stunt. A few days later, I got a call from Sarah. Apparently, Mom had reached out to her, desperate for assistance. She didn't directly ask Sarah for money. She knew that would be a dead end. Instead, she attempted to manipulate Sarah into influencing me. She kept emphasizing how important it is to keep the family together, Sarah recounted, and how you'll regret it if you don't step in and help. I let out a bitter laugh, the sound tinged with exasperation. "Typical," I said. "She's still trying to guilt me into fixing Rick's mess." She seemed really distressed, though, Sarah added, her voice full of concern. She seemed incredibly stressed about this. I didn't feel sorry for her, not anymore. She had chosen Rick over me years ago, and now she was facing the consequences of her decision. Yet, a part of me was curious. I wanted to know just how far Rick was willing to go with this charade. Against my better instincts, I dialed Mom's number. When she answered, her voice was thin, worn out. A sigh almost escaped her lips. I wondered when you'd call. I cut right to it. Dave told me everything about Rick, I said, my voice tight. Is it true? Is he really threatening to leave you over that stupid apartment? The silence that followed was all the answer I needed. She didn't want to admit it, I could tell. He's just stressed, she said, the word sounding fragile. It's been a lot on him. Stressed? I couldn't help the edge creeping into my tone. Mom, he hasn't held down a job in years. You're the one juggling everything, paying all the bills. What pressure is he under? He's doing the best he can, she mumbled. No, he isn't, I snapped back, frustration boiling over. He's using you, Mom. He's holding your happiness hostage to get what he wants. That seemed to pierce through her denial. She bristled, her tone defensive. You don't understand, she insisted. Rick loves me. He's only trying to do what's best for Julia. The words stung. If he loved you, he wouldn't treat you like this, I countered, my voice shaking slightly. He wouldn't force you to choose between him and your financial security. This isn't love, Mom. It's plain manipulation. She didn't respond, and the silence stretched, heavy and thick between us. Finally, she whispered, I just need to figure things out. I thought you'd be on my side, but I guess I was wrong. The line went dead. There was nothing left to say. The following week was a slow drip of bad news from Dave. Mom was tapping into her retirement, draining her savings to cover the cost of that apartment, desperate to keep Rick from leaving. She was sacrificing her future, her security for him. Meanwhile, Rick was living it up. Dave said he saw him at O'Malley's, laughing, throwing back beers like he didn't have a care in the world. And Mom? She was working double shifts, stressing herself sick trying to keep him happy. The final call from Dave was almost gleeful. You're not going to believe this, he said, a weird kind of excitement in his voice. Try me, I replied, bracing myself. Rick's gone, he announced. Apparently, Rick had packed his bags a few days earlier and walked out. And not only that, he cleared out half of Mom's remaining savings. He even took her car, claiming it was technically his since she signed it over to him years back. I didn't feel bad for her. Not really. She'd let him walk all over her for years, and now she was paying the consequences. But a part of me ached, not for her current situation, but for who she used to be. The mom who worked tirelessly, who made sure I had everything I needed before Rick came along and changed everything. I haven't spoken to her since. Part of me expects a call, maybe even an apology, but honestly, I don't know if I could bring myself to forgive her. That's where things stand. Thanks for reading, Reddit. If anything else unfolds, I'll update, but for now, I'm just relieved he's finally gone. Update 3 Hey Reddit, it's been a while, and I honestly wasn't sure if I'd ever post again. But I noticed a few of you calling me out for leaving things hanging, so I thought I'd give you a little closure. First, thank you. Thank you to everyone who commented, sent messages, offered advice, and support. It's crazy how many people understood, how many had been through something similar. Knowing I wasn't alone made a world of difference. I read every single comment, every message. They meant more than I can say. So here's where things are now. After Rick left, after he bled her dry, financially and emotionally, Mom finally reached out. The text arrived like a jolt out of nowhere, a message from a number I didn't recognize. Weeks had passed since our last interaction, and honestly, I'd resigned myself to the idea that she was done with me. And then, suddenly, there it was, a text as if nothing had fractured between us. Moments later, my phone rang. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the answer button, but I couldn't bring myself to pick up. Instead, I let it go to voicemail. Listening back, the message was unsettlingly subdued. Her usual vibrancy was gone, replaced by a weary tone I'd rarely heard. Hey, she began, the word almost a sigh. I know I've messed things up really badly. I really need to talk to you. Please call me back. I replayed the message, the request hanging in the air. A complicated tangle of emotions churned inside me. A part of me, a small, cautious part, wondered if she'd finally seen through Rick's manipulation. But the larger, more guarded part screamed at me to protect the boundaries I'd painstakingly constructed. Choosing the path of least resistance, I texted her. It felt safer, more controlled, less vulnerable than a direct conversation. My message was brief, what do you want to talk about? Her reply was immediate, can we meet in person? I want to apologize. An apology? From her? That felt unprecedented, unreal. Despite every instinct screaming at me, I found myself agreeing. We settled on a coffee shop equidistant from our homes, a neutral space, free from the ghosts of past hurts and resentments. The woman I saw waiting was almost unrecognizable. She seemed diminished, somehow smaller, as if the weight of her choices had finally caught up with her. Her wave was tentative, and for a split second, that familiar pang of guilt stabbed at me. but I pushed it down, steeling myself. "Thanks for coming," she said, her voice a little strained as I sat. I didn't respond immediately. I simply looked at her, a silent prompt for her to begin. "I owe you an apology," she started, her voice trembling slightly, "for everything. For the money, for pushing you away, for prioritizing Rick over you. I understand now how wrong I was." I wish I could say her words delivered the closure I'd secretly hoped for, but they didn't, not entirely. Perhaps I'd stopped believing an apology would ever come, and hearing it now felt oddly detached. "I'm so sorry it took losing everything for me to see it," she continued, her eyes fixed on her hands. "Rick, he manipulated me, you know? He made me feel like I had to choose him and his kids to preserve some semblance of a family. I thought I was doing what was right, but I understand now the pain I caused you." I nodded, offering no encouragement. I wasn't ready to drop my defenses just because she was finally acknowledging what I already knew. "I know I can't undo the past," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "but I want to try to repair our relationship if you'll let me." The words finally broke through my carefully constructed walls. "Mom," I said, my voice low, "I'm glad you're seeing things clearly now, but you need to realize that it's not that simple. You deeply hurt me, and an apology, while appreciated, isn't enough to erase that." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why now?" I asked, the question laced with years of unspoken pain. "Why are you coming to me now after everything?" She sighed, a long, drawn-out sound filled with regret. "Because," she admitted, her voice cracking, "I don't have anyone else. Rick is gone. Julia and Max won't speak to me, and I finally realized that I pushed away the only person who ever genuinely cared about me." Her words, raw and vulnerable, landed with a force I hadn't anticipated. They resonated with a truth that was both painful and undeniable. Her words hung in the air. Were they genuine, or simply another tactic to manipulate me with guilt? Regardless, they left me feeling utterly torn. "I just can't handle this right now," I finally managed to say, the words heavy and difficult. "I need time. Time to figure out where, or even if, we go from here." She simply nodded, her eyes glistening, and dabbed at them with a tissue. "I understand," she replied softly. "Take all the time you require." After a strained farewell, I walked out of the coffee shop, feeling more exhausted than I had in what felt like an eternity. That was several weeks ago now, and silence has filled the space between us. She sent a few texts, little snippets of her life, updates on her day-to-day, and the occasional, painful, "I miss you." I haven't responded. I think I'm still trying to make sense of everything, to truly process it all. It's proving incredibly difficult to reconcile the mother I remember, the one who helped shape me, with the person she has become. Whether I'll ever be able to fully trust her again remains a significant question mark in my mind. But one thing I know with absolute certainty, I refuse to simply let her back into my life just because she's suddenly ready, or claims to be ready, to make amends. Forgiveness is a complicated, messy, and deeply personal process, and it definitely doesn't come easily. Right now, my priority is focusing on myself, on nurturing the life I've painstakingly built without her presence. Perhaps someday, down the road, we might be able to rebuild some kind of relationship. But that day is not today. And I'm not sure it ever will be.